Hello everybody, and welcome to the first part of the Rory Excalibur show. This vlog series is mainly just to document my thoughts and process how I've been feeling, and with any luck it might help some of you watching. This is primarily a selfish endeavour, a documentation of myself that I can hopefully look upon one day and hopefully not reminisce, and hopefully look back and go, man, thank God I'm out of there, thank God I'm not wearing a stupid wizard hat anymore and I'm, living the good life. Today's visual aid is nothing. As you can see, I don't know if it comes across on camera, we're out of order today. I tried, this is a Windows XP setup. I tried to get it working while I was installing a piece of software. I don't remember what it was, some driver or something like that, and completely corrupted the Windows install. And since then I haven't been able to get it working again without completely just wiping the thing. So hopefully by next time we'll get some good visual aid going. But for the meantime, it's just going to be me. We have the Obama shirt on, so it's a good day. Today's topic is introspection. Introspection and attachment. Now, what do I mean by that? I think when it comes to thinking about oneself, introspection is a very shallow stage, a very early on stage. It's like saying, I have a leak in my roof. Well, that's good knowledge, it's good to know that you have a leak in your roof, but that doesn't tell you like where in the roof is the leak, how long the leak has been there, where the tools are to fix it, if you have the tools to fix it, how to fix the leak. Introspection is only that very first step of, going, well, there's a leak in my ceiling. And everything else after that requires a lot more thought, a lot more planning, and all of that is, encompassed in the human experience. And you meet people, you meet people in your life, and you can tell, who is introspective and who isn't, and often, it's a pretty clear-cut case, people who are generally pretty awful, or, just not very nice people, or very nice to others, or to themselves, generally aren't too introspective, because they're not recognizing that problem and then taking the steps to go from there. But why am I talking, about introspection today? Well, I've been, looking into myself and, trying to piece together things that I haven't quite gotten around to yet. Not gotten around to either because I haven't had the time commitment or the motivation, or because I just simply don't know how. And with that, the main overall topic I want to look at today, which I completely forgot to mention at the beginning, is dread, and how dread has ruined my life up until this point. Now, I'm going to be using dread as a bit of an umbrella term, because for me at least it's very all-encompassing of an issue, right? For an example, I don't know if anybody else experiences this, but me personally, I can't do anything recreationally or, any hobbies or anything like that until I get all my work done, whether that be homework, schoolwork, work, or even just things like, meal prep, working out, anything that isn't inherently a hobby or something to do as like recreationally. I can't do it until everything else is done. And the reason for that is, I'll be, let's just say I'm playing a game, right? Playing a game, and it's almost a feeling of guilt, a strong, heavy feeling of anxiety, of dread that is weighed down on my shoulders that makes the whole experience unenjoyable. I'm unable to fully enjoy what I'm doing because I'm so anxious and full of dread about something on the horizon that I've yet to do, or the irresponsibility of not doing something. Even if let's just say it's an assignment that isn't due for a month, and it just got put in my lap the other day. Even though I have all that time, I'm unable to enjoy myself knowing that that's on the horizon, and that I should be focusing on that. And that's just a secular example. A very prominent example in my life, let's just say, of dread affecting me. But this idea bleeds out into almost every part of my life, and this is something that I've only really started to realize in recent times. I've realized, and another topic I wanted to add on is anxious attachment. And I don't mean anxious attachment as just in the relationship sense, which is what it's traditionally mentioned in, but anxious attachment as far as any part of your life, which you can sort of see how that already starts to tie into what I mentioned before with dread. Also, something I want to mention is just to keep in mind that this is completely off the dome. There's no script. All I have here is just a couple of talking points, so that I stay on course for the most part. But even then, it's not even too good. So I'm mostly just rambling here. So I apologize for any large pauses. Yes, what I was saying, anxious attachment. For me, anxious attachment has always stemmed from dread, at least in a loose sense. For example, I'm currently, dating somebody. We've been talking for about 3 weeks, and I'm realizing that I'm starting to repeat some of these unhealthy tendencies that I have in the past, such as being anxiously attached. But despite this is the first time in a long time where I've slowed down and thought, why am I doing this? Why am I like this? I know that isn't a very profound thing to think, a profound thing, just to, for the first time to, think introspectively on something like that. But for me, at the very least, it was the first time, because I feel like it's very easy to just assign labels to things and have that be the, be all and end all. Just be like, oh, I'm an avoidant, or I have anxious attachment, or I'm this, or I'm that, and then the conversation ends there. Nobody stops to ask, well, why are you like that? Why are you behaving this way? Because inherently, a lot of these tendencies and traits are fairly toxic, but they've become very normalized, and been normalized into labels, instead of symptoms. And so for me, I started to think of what's my diagnosis for this anxious attachment, and in a general sense it leads back to the anxiety of dread. And you can go even further into that and be like, well, why do you have all this dread? For some people it might be like, oh, well, childhood trauma, or, some other cataclysmic event in their life. But for me, at the very least from what I can gauge, is that it all comes from very humble beginnings. Like, in school I always wanted to be the best. Like, I'm not talking about high school. I'm talking about like grade 1. You know, I wanted to be the best. And anytime I didn't be the best, or if someone beat me, that would affect me personally. And you know, this all small apples. You know, it's like it didn't matter then. You know, realistically, very little has mattered up until now. But they didn't affect. You know, they didn't change. You know, me wanting to be the best, and having validation from adults around me in my life, telling me that I was the best, made that when I didn't reach my best, became crushing, and it developed into an anxiety. And that anxiety slowly turned into dread. Well, I mean, you know, anxiety and dread are sort of two sides of the same coin, really. They almost mean the same thing. But I feel like anxiety is more of a panic, and dread is more of a weight. You know, a weight upon yourself, whether that be, you know, pressure in your chest, or, you know, on your shoulders, or whatever. You know, that's what it is. And so, for me, over the years, you know, when I started to progress into high school, that anxiety continued to build up and develop into something that resembled dread. I dreaded, it wasn't so much that I dreaded the work, it's that I dreaded what my life as a whole would be until the work was done. I dreaded the fact that I knew that I wasn't going to be able to enjoy anything until the work was done. And knowing that made me depressed. Made me severely depressed, because life is always work. There is always a goal in your life that you complete begrudgingly, you know, whether it's work that's been put in your lap, or a problem that you have to deal with, or someone that you have to deal with. These are all things that you don't want to do, you don't generally care about, or you recognize they have very little worth, but they're still tasks that you have to do. Even to something as simple as mowing the grass. And that's just, you know, a consistency in life. And so when you have that consistency in your life of, you know, work that you always don't want to do, it's going to make you depressed, you know. And I understand that's generally, that would be considered a weak mindset, and it is. I just didn't know that that's what it was. And so, I've, you know, had this dread, you know, up until the present time as I'm speaking. And that has flowed into other parts of my life, such as in relationships, which is what I'll be covering now. I've laid out loosely just now, you know, where the dread stems from, for me personally. But I've only recently sort of made the correlation between that and my relationships. And I've realized that I've never put myself first. I've never prioritized myself. It's always been an ignorant selflessness that I've lived. And I think that does stem from wanting to do the best always. You know, some might call that perfectionism. But I've never worried about being perfect, I've just worried about being the best. And so, I don't remember who said it, maybe it was Robin Williams or some actor, I don't know. Or maybe I read it somewhere, I could be completely wrong. I'm not citing my sources. But someone said that love is an irrational selflessness. And it's an irrational selflessness because, well, it's exactly that. You know, it's you giving 110% of yourself to somebody or something, and giving, you know, over 100% or even 100% of yourself to anything can be very unhealthy. You know, let alone 110%. And that's especially the case when it's not reciprocated, either in people or your work. And to say that that is what love is partially true. You know, I'd say that's a symptom of love, and not as much, you know, the be all and end all. Because I think knowing that, you can then regulate, right? You can regulate, and wind yourself back and be like, okay, you know, I don't need to fully be putting 110% of myself into this, you know, lest I want to destroy myself. But that's very easy to forget. I've realized it's a realization I've had over the recent times, is that I'm very much an anxious attachment person. Not willingly, obviously. And I was thinking about, where does this stem from? And I realized it very much stems from, you know, wanting to be the best, wanting everything to work out. And so when there's any bumps in the road that goes against the status quo or the plan, the plan, it ruins me, you know, it fills me with anxiety. And obviously, you know, that's not very healthy. But I was like, you know, I was looking further into, you know, why am I like this? And I believe that a lot of it comes from also, you know, being irrationally selfless. Recently, with this person I've been seeing, I realized that without even knowing it, that I was falling back into the same habits. You know, wanting to give them everything. Wanting to just shower them in gifts, in affection, in time and attention. And for me, you know, that was just what I figured was correct in my own little, you know, in my own little bubble. But for some people, that's the antithesis of everything that they're looking for. You know, and both sides of this are, you know, not healthy. You know, being like that, wanting to, you know, give everything, is not healthy. Especially this early on. But it's that whole thing, you know. I remember it was like a joke I saw a while back. It's like, you know, you start talking to someone and you instantly, like, imagine your whole future with them. And even though I say that as a joke, like, that's my reality, you know, is just immediately seeing the goal at the end and being like, that's where we're going, is like. And so we see the goal at the end and we're like, okay, what are all the steps I need to take to get to that point? And I was thinking like that, I was like, holy shit, this is the exact same thing I do with my work. I see the end and I'm like, let's do everything we possibly can and correctly as soon as possible to get to that end point. Because the sooner we're at that end point, and the sooner we're at that security, then my life can be okay again. And realize what I said there, okay again, you know. My life can't be okay until these things are finished. And so, without even knowing it, I was rushing towards this end point of security, purely out of anxiety, you know. Of course, for a lot of people that's also like just a general ideal, you know, if you're interested in someone, you'd, you know, love to be in a secure relationship with them. But for me, what was mainly fueling me was anxiety and chasing the security of wanting, you know, to be okay again. And, you know, that goes without saying that that's not healthy. For everybody, you know. For myself and for the whatever victim has to hear my ramblings. Such as yourself. And so, yeah, I've been slowly unraveling that and trying to understand that. And I find myself often getting carried away. Getting carried away with wanting to move fast. I've always lived under the ideology of, like, if you want something, then just do it. You know, nothing falls in your lap, unless it's completely external. For example, you know, I love playing guitar. I've been playing now for 13 years. And for the most part, I play by myself. I play fingerstyle guitar. I play, you know, by myself. I play, you know, a lot of the songs by the likes of Chet Atkins and Tommy Manuel, Kenta Nishimura, and, you know, several others. But it's a very lonely playing style, on purpose. And I've always enjoyed playing with people, but that's more of a... But for the longest time I always just thought, well, you know, that's something that sort of just comes around, you know. It's like eventually, you know, someone will come around and be like, hey, do you want to be in a band? And we're off like that. And those opportunities rarely ever came. And if they did, they usually ended up being pretty sour. For, you know, not for any personal reason, but just, you know, it wasn't really my crowd. And, but once I started, you know, pulling in the reins and started going, well, you know, I'm going to start a band. You know, I'm going to start reaching out to people and playing with people, that, you know, things started to move along. I've kind of I've forgotten the reason why I was bringing this up, but in general, yeah, that's alright. It's because, you know, if I want something done, I'll get it done myself. Same with, you know, in my academic career, you know, even though I know engineering, which is what I'm currently studying, is a bit out of my depth, you know, I wouldn't classify myself as someone who's very math-brained or anything like that. But it's something that, you know, I am relatively passionate about, and so it's like, despite it being, you know, challenging for someone like myself, I'm still going to try. You know, even, you know, stuff like with, you know, with this, you know, I didn't know anything about computers. My parents didn't know anything about computers, really. And I didn't have any friends that gave a shit about computers, but I found them interesting. And so I taught myself, you know, how to get this running. You know, this computer that's older than I am, I figured it out. And so, because I've focused my life so much around this ideology, I've applied it to areas of my life where it shouldn't be applicable, or where I shouldn't apply it, such as relationships. Because if anything, relationships are the antithesis of that idea. Sorry, voice crack. The antithesis of that idea. And I've only just learnt that. I've only just learnt that now. And it feels embarrassing to say that, you know, at the age of 20, that I've only just learnt that. You know, and for context, before talking to this person, I was in a relationship for 3 years. And I know at that young of an age, it's like you're still learning. But it's been a while that I've been out of that, and only now, after talking to this new person, have I realised that. And it's funny because now that I've realised that, you know, I'm connecting all the dots and being like, that's why all these problems happened. It was because of me. Because of my unwillingness to, you know, recognise anything outside of my bubble. I wouldn't say unwillingness, but just like the blissful ignorance of thinking that I'm correct, or that what I'm doing is right. And so, you know, chasing that deadline, or not really a deadline, but that end goal, becomes this frantic panic. You know, I want to get to that end point. I want that security so I can relax, and that so my life can be okay again. But that's not how it goes in relationships. That's not how that works. You know, and if you know, maybe if you're lucky, you'll find someone that's, you know, just as crazy as I am. and, you know, wants to get to that point, you know, and wants to progress to something like that soon. But for most people, especially, you know, people my age, everybody's still figuring it out. Everybody else is taking it slow. Everybody's, you know, playing the field, seeing what's happening. And so that ideology completely goes against that. And the reason why I've been thinking this is because recently, with this person I've been talking with, I had a not so much a difficult conversation, but an over-bloated conversation where I was mostly just rambling about, you know, what my ideals were for something long term. And it was only after that I realized I didn't need to say any of that, and I shouldn't have been really thinking about any of that, you know. And I realized that, you know, I rambled all of that out. I don't even know where the fuck that came from. I realizing that I was rambling all of that out, because I wanted to reach that security. I wanted to feel okay. And I feared that I may have, you know, damaged a bit of what I've had with this person, or that I might have, you know, poisoned the well a bit by being too, you know, hard and heavy too early on. So we'll see how all that goes, but it was definitely a wake-up call, because I realized, why am I doing this? Why am I micro-analyzing every part of, you know, this relationship that isn't really anything yet, you know? Why did I do the exact same thing beforehand with my previous long-term relationship, where, you know, I was micro-analyzing every single part of everything, ironing out every little kink to make sure things were perfect, so things could be the best that they could be. There was no reason for that, and all it did was ruin everything. And so, part of why I'm here talking to you today is to help myself work through this. Therapy is expensive, and as much as I enjoy calling my friends on the phone, you know, they're busy with their relations or work or uni or, you know, their own lives, that I don't want to be a, you know, little pest, a little fly on the wall, constantly, you know, bugging them. Don't get me wrong, I do understand that it is important to call people, but, you know, at the moment I don't have anybody to share all my thoughts with, besides myself. And so that's why I'm here, talking to you. Yeah, so we'll see how everything goes. Now that, you know, I've recognized this thing, I'm gonna, you know, continue to not let things like this get to me. It's a very hard habit to break, considering I've been like this since as long as I've known myself. Which I know is a bit of an oxymoron. Since I've known myself, you know, you don't really know yourself, do you? You don't know yourself. If you fully knew yourself, you probably wouldn't be here listening to me, someone with, you know, ill advice and not too much experience under his belt. But yeah, so you don't truly know yourself, and I'm still figuring that out, naturally. But, of course, you know, thinking things over in your own mind only gets you so far. Sometimes talking it out helps, which is essentially what this video series is for. This is for me. This isn't for you, unfortunately. If you've happened to stumble across this and you've gotten this far, then, you know, I appreciate that. But yeah, and so, how do you treat this issue? Right? How do you go about treating this? Well, slowing down, really. That's the main medicine that I've been able to think of, is slowing down. Letting things unfold as they do. And also detaching and disconnecting oneself from these situations. I've realized part of what makes me so stressed is getting so involved in situations. Like, I think about even back in let's just say year 9, year 8, when I had my, schoolwork then, I was stressing over that. Stressing over a geography exam. Who gives a shit? Right? Think about any, assume if you're someone around my age, or even someone, in school, or older. Think back to your past, exams and stuff. Does any of that matter? Did any of it matter? No. It didn't. All those, geography exams, history exams, art exams, and, assignments that I had in, early high school, none of them mattered. But I stressed about every single one of them the exact same way, like it was the end of the world. I've harbored so much unneeded stress, enough for a lifetime, over medial things that do not matter. And so it's a habit, a terrible habit that I've developed. That is naturally with any habit, any long-term habit, it's hard to shake. And only in recent times have I started to detach myself from my academic work, and realize it for what it is. Realizing what is truly beneficial to my long term, and what is simply an assignment for the sake of an assignment. Discerning that, and then, applying the appropriate amount of pressure to each situation. Because there is a healthy amount of pressure. If you had zero pressure, you wouldn't get anything done. Anxiety does help and can be beneficial in the natural way that it is meant to be, but, just like with anything in life, having too much of it will ruin you. And so only now have I realized, well, I need to apply this to my relations as well. And so, but how do you go about that? Because that's a very different, ballpark. It's not like work, because work is a individualistic thing at the end of the day. I know you can argue, well, what about, group work and group assignments, but for the most part, in a group work, you have your task. You have your thing that you have to do, and that's completely dependent on you. It's not like that in a relationship. There's, two sides. And so, getting a read on that other side and acting accordingly and appropriately is extremely important. And for the longest time, like I said before, I was just doing the most that I could do always, not realizing how toxic that can be, how overbearing, and how much pressure that can have on somebody. And, I always just thought, with dating apps and whatnot, people just ghost people all the time. People disappear out of other people's lives without explanation. Or, if they do leave you, with an explanation, it can sometimes be either hollow, shallow, or inaccurate or dishonest. This isn't like a be-all, end-all thing. Like this isn't me having like a little crash out about these things. These things happen, but why these things happen is a different reason. And I realize that a lot of the times that these things have happened to me, I can trace it back and realize, it's because I was doing too much. I was being too overbearing and causing too much pressure, thinking I was being great, thinking I was doing everything correctly. And it is funny because I've seen, other people in relationships and be like, how do they do it so easily? How can they pretend to not care and it works out? Because that's the exact opposite of what I'm doing, you know, playing hard to get. Like, you know, how these people, you know, playing hard to get, and how's that work? Because I'm doing the exact opposite. I'm communicating and talking every opportunity I can, you know, seizing every opportunity I can to, you know, be with people and hang out with people. But the reason for me doing those things is because I'm anxious and because I want security. And only recently, as of like today, recent, have I started to want to break that habit and redirect my life and attention so that I'm not thinking about these things as much. The term situationship is one that I don't really agree with. I think that there's such a thing as there's healthy relationships and then there's unhealthy relationships. And it's very easy to define, you know, both of those. I'm sure, you know, if you've been with anybody, you know what either of those things are, so I won't bother wasting your time. But with that, it's hard to discern sometimes when you're in it what is and isn't healthy. You know, you can be very easily blinded by what is and isn't healthy when you're with someone, and I find myself in that predicament a lot. And so, when these predicaments arise, what do? Oh, well, you know, I do the same thing I've always been doing, working as hard as I can to fix the issue. And that's not what I should have been doing. Taking a step back, detaching from it, is the best option for someone in my position. But man, is it difficult. Man, is it difficult to detach yourself, because to detach yourself is to stop thinking about it. But how do you stop thinking about it? Well, you can't, you know. Even if you're the most distracted you could be, there's always going to be something like, you know, in the back of your head that brings it up again. And, you know, this is a common thing. I know this isn't anything profound, but it is an issue. And so even now, today, in this morning, I have had breakfast, did a bit of uni work, attempted to do a workout, and now I'm here talking to you. And all of this while I'm waiting for a text message from someone I'm talking to. I have my phone on Do Not Disturb, so that it happens when it happens. And the text message I'm waiting for is either good news or bad news, or no news at all. And something like that is hard to ignore in your life, waiting for outcomes. Oh, there goes my elbow. Waiting for outcomes, right? And it's hard to ignore that. It's hard to detach yourself from that and be like, you know, I don't want to think about this anymore, you know? Especially when there's so much anxiety tied to it. It's a double-edged sword, or rather, you know, a sword that won't even come out of its sheath. Because, like, it's just like, I can't do it. I can't do it. Why can't I do it, right? And it all stems from just wanting security. The past 4 months, even greater than that, a couple months of my life, have been without security and have been completely uncertain. Now, I'm someone that likes to have a plan. I don't use, you know, Google Calendar. I'm not that strict. but I do like to have a general idea of what I'm doing all the time. And I've had no clue what's going on for the past half year, and it's really started to wear me down. It's like, and when I say wear me down, it's almost like, you know, like boring a hole into a piece of wood. You know, it just slowly but surely just keeps whittling away. And that's, you know, a surefire way to depression. You know, not being able to regulate that. And so I've been thinking, well, how do I detach from this? How do I detach from this so I can stop thinking about this? And there's plenty of tutorials online and on, you know, Google and YouTube and fucking Bing, God forbid, that, you know, hundreds of gurus and coaches that tell you all this shit. I don't mean to say shit, a lot of it is genuinely good advice, but it's a lot of the same things over again. It's meant to be a pretty all-encompassing people so it can apply to the most amount of people. No amount of, you know, doom-scrolling Reddit threads about the problem you have will help. Sure, it can help, you know, open your eyes a little bit, but rarely, you know, these things are applicable to your situation because everybody's different. You know, a lot of us can be in the same situation, but everybody's different. The root causes for everybody's problems are different. It reminds me of, this is a bit of a throwback, Skylanders, like swap, ones that you could like switch out the different pieces of and have all these different combinations like that, you know. Like, even though you have your one half and it's, you know, what it is, someone else comes along and they're completely random. You know, which is, you know, a blessing and a curse. And so, yeah, trying to figure out, you know, how to treat this. And, you know, I've tried, like I said before, I've tried all sorts of things, you know, like distracting myself and whatnot. But, you know, that only does so much. You know, it always comes back. You know, I want to stop. There's a difference between, you know, distracting oneself and detaching oneself. A distraction is just exactly that. It's a distraction. It's not addressing anything. Detachment is something else. Because I can distract myself all I like. I know how to distract myself. But how do I detach myself? Some people say, you know, find something else you're equally as passionate about. Or completely dump the whole thing. You know, if it's causing you this much problem, leave it behind. But nothing good is earned without, you know, suffering. And so I'm stuck in a predicament where, you know, I'm just going to keep doing this whole thing, suffering through this whole thing, praying and hoping that the outcome is ideal. And that's at the flip of a coin at this point. With a lot of aspects of my life, not just relationships. If there's anything I've said about uncertainty, it's not great things. And, you know, it's not the worst advice, you know, to leave things behind. But you never truly leave things behind, do you? You know? You tell yourself you do. Maybe if you leave a partner, you know, they become your ex. You tell yourself you're over them and that you're done with them. But you walk by some street or some place you used to frequent with them, and it all comes flooding back. You know, even if they've hurt you, what they were and what things were come back and haunt you. And so, there's no true ending. There's no true detachment from anything. You can have light detachment, sure, but there's no true detachment. So that, while sure that is an option, it doesn't feel all-encompassing. Another quote, that I'm sure Robin Williams said this one, because it was from a Good Will Hunting, I think. But he was like, you know, something along the lines of, you know, if they're easy, you know, if they're, you know, everything that you've ever wanted them to be and there's no struggle, then it's boring. And it doesn't feel worth it. There needs to be a bit of friction. Things shouldn't be perfect. I mean, also the statistical likelihood that they are is extremely infinitesimal. But it's important to remember, you know, that these, you know, problems are part of it, you know, and the suffering that comes with it is what makes the reward and the end, you know, result of that feel so much more liberating, so much more validating, you know, that you suffered, and then you're, you know, enjoying the rewards of your labor. But what if there are no rewards? What if there's no rewards and it's only suffering? What do you do then? What if you commit yourself several years to somebody just for nothing to come of it? Whether that be, you know, a situationship or whatever. Years is a bit of an exaggeration, let's just say months. For some unlucky soul, I'm sure it is years, but moving on. Yeah, what do you do then? You know, let's just say you committed 4 months to someone who doesn't have the same ideals as you, and they drop you. All that suffering for those months, just for nothing. Sure, you could, you know, pick at hairs and say, well, you know, you learned something along the way. But that doesn't make up anything, you know, that is, it's like a, you know, it's like spending all your money at the arcade, spending it all on a claw machine, or like spending it all on one of those more gambly type ticket machines. You know, let's just say you put in $20, and all you get once you go to the prize counter is like a little, I don't know, like a little rubber ball. That doesn't equate to what you put in. It's just suffering. You put yourself through months of suffering for nothing. And that's it, you know? That's it, that's the hard truth. And it's trial and error. It's trial and error, this suffering. You know, sometimes you know, enjoy your rewards, and a lot of times you don't. And it's not the suffering that I have a problem with. It's the continuous and the repeated unending of it, and the toll that it takes on the soul. A permanent toll that it can take on the soul. And this permanent toll, you know, it can be the sort of thing where people realize, like, oh, I can't be loved. There's something wrong with me, right? And that's not, you know, the case often, but that's how it can make you feel. And so I'm still figuring it out. I'm not going to pretend like I have the answers, because I don't. If it isn't obvious already, it's not like I'm the most kept person. I mean, like, you know, sane person. Like, you know, I'm wearing a wizard hat in an Obama shirt, talking in front of an old ass computer, bags under my eyes, I haven't shaved. You know. things aren't going, perfect this side of the town, and so I'm not going to pretend like I'm qualified to talk about anything. Like I said, this series is just meant to be me rambling. And so hopefully conditions improve and I learn more about myself as we go on. But that's all I have to say for today. If you've gone up to this point, then you should probably drink some water or take care of yourself, or at the very least think about a better way to spend your time next time. But yeah, with that, onwards and upwards. Thank you for being here with me.